Hi, this is Andy with RDPsoft. Today I'm going to show you how to quickly deploy our Remote Desktop Canary tool to perform synthetic monitoring and alerting on your RDS, AVD, and other end-user computing environments. When sizing a VM that will run Remote Desktop Canary, we recommend one with 2 to 4 vCPUs and about 8 gigs of RAM. Also, it should be a Windows Server operating system, or if you're running it inside an AVD tenant, a multi-session version of Windows 10 or Windows 11. This is because Remote Desktop Canary needs to create a local user session on the VM it is running in order to do its routine tests. To get started, download the RD Canary Setup package to a VM inside your internal network, even if you plan on later doing testing from outside your network. Initially installing it inside your network will make it easier to build workflows against connection brokers and other systems. Remote Desktop Canary will immediately prompt you for its licensing file. Please install the license file you were sent from RDPsoft after starting your subscription. Once you've installed your license file, it's time to create your first Remote Desktop Canary workflow using Remote Desktop Canary's Workflow Builder Wizard. A workflow is simply a specification for performing synthetic RDP testing against one or more RDS collections or one or more servers. The Workflow Builder Wizard simplifies this process and does most of the work for you. Note that you'll want to make sure you're logged in with full admin rights while running the wizard so that the wizard can create standard user accounts in the domain it needs in order to get Remote Desktop Canary up and running. Also, running as an admin will allow it to place special testing applets in the netlogon directory of your domain and set login scripts in Active Directory for the Remote Desktop Canary testing user. Alright, so the first workflow I'm going to build is one that tests multiple RDS collections. Collection tests can be designed to test all of the components of your RDS farm, from the gateway, if you use one, to the broker's proper routing of the connection to a session host, onto the session host itself. All I need to do in the wizard is type in the name of one of my connection brokers, and the wizard will pull back all of the information I need about the collections that broker maintains. Then I can just check the collections I want to monitor. In the testing parameters section of the wizard, you tell Remote Desktop Canary how you want it to perform tests against servers or RDS collections in your environment. For instance, if you want to test through a remote desktop gateway, you can specify that option. You can also indicate how frequently you want to repeat the tests of each server or collection. Remote Desktop Canary will attempt to automatically calculate this value based on the number of collections and systems you specified in the previous wizard step. You can also specify what email addresses to send alert messages to, and in the bottom of this wizard section, you can build a connection to the mail server you want to relay these alerts through. You'll probably also want to enable OCR testing, which will make Remote Desktop Canary verify that either the desktop was successfully loaded when the session started, or whether or not an application was successfully launched. You can also build a connection to a SQL server to store test results in a SQL table. If you have a licensed subscription to our Remote Desktop Commander suite, these test results will show up in its top-level deployment dashboard, but you can also write your own Grafana or similar program to consume that data. For more information on how any of these testing parameters work, click the Help menu button in the bottom left-hand corner. In the Credentials area of the Workflow Builder Wizard, you'll specify the domain name and username of the account in Active Directory that you want Remote Desktop Canary to log in as when conducting synthetic tests. If this account doesn't already exist in AD, our wizard will attempt to create it, provided you are running the wizard while logged in with an admin account in your domain. Please note, in order for testing to work correctly, you will need to both exempt this Remote Desktop Canary test login from MFA, if you have an MFA solution enabled for your RDS environment, and you will also need to make sure this account has permissions to log into the RDS collections you are testing. This can be done from the RDS Manager in the Server Manager on the Connection Broker. Once you have finished setting up the Remote Desktop Canary synthetic login test credentials, click Next, and the Workflow Builder wizard will attempt to set everything up. It will create any necessary user accounts, assign any needed login scripts, and put required testing applets in the netlogon directory of the domain. If there are any problems performing these steps, they will be logged, and you can double-click on any failed actions for more information. Once your workflow is built, Remote Desktop Canary will prompt you to set up one final item before it can start performing synthetic RDP login tests for you. You will need to create the sandbox account that Remote Desktop Canary will use to create a local session on the VM where it is installed, where it will then launch instances of RDP clients to perform those synthetic tests. This account can be a domain user account or a local user account on the VM, and it does not need elevated rights. If the account doesn't exist, Remote Desktop Canary will attempt to automatically create it if the account you are logged in with has admin rights on the domain or local machine. Finally, we recommend turning on debug logging, as these logs contain tons of details you can inspect if a synthetic login test fails. As you can see here, the Workflow Builder wizard has added both of the RDS collections for testing and has set the same testing properties for both collections. So the next thing we need to do is perform a manual test to make sure that both of these synthetic login tests work successfully against both RDS collections. But we need to first save these tests in a workflow file first, so let's do that from the File menu. After the tests are saved to a workflow file, we can start the synthetic tests manually to make sure they work as anticipated. So go to the Run and Schedule Tests menu and choose Test Current Workflow Once. In just a few seconds, you can see that the first test is started and the Remote Desktop Canary Lightweight RDP client is running. You will also see that the signed-in applet launches via a login script after the testing user's desktop has been loaded, and then that same applet automatically logs out the session. In the interest of time, I've sped up both of the tests in this video, but when you do your testing, the stagger seconds interval will control the time Remote Desktop Canary waits in between tests. If you do not see the Lightweight RDP client start up, wait a few minutes, and then check your email to see the reason for the failure. Also, you can open up the Debug Logs folder under the Remote Desktop Canary installation directory for more detailed information you can send to RDPsoft support if need be. Okay, now that I've tested my RDS collection synthetic tests without issue and have saved them to their own workflow file, I'm now going to create a new set of synthetic tests, this time targeting every RDS host that's present in these collections. Why would you test every single RDS session host individually? Well, one good reason is to do what I like to call a sanity check of all your RDS servers in the early morning to make sure they're fully responding to RDP requests. This is especially useful if you perform scheduled Windows, GPO, or app updates at night, which could impact some or all of your terminal servers with breaking changes. By scheduling an early morning set of tests against all of your RDS hosts, you can get early warnings to your support desk prior to users attempting to log into their apps and desktops and encountering problems. So if you'll notice, I started the Workflow Builder wizard again, and this time I chose the second option for individual hosts. Then I selected all of my hosts from my AD server, but I also could have grabbed individual hosts from a connection broker or an AVD host pool. I kept my testing parameters pretty much the same, and elected to use the same Canary testing account as before. Note that I've kept the checkbox checked that places the testing user account into the local remote desktop users group on each session host, and also automatically sets permissions on each host so that the testing account can make a console or admin style logon at each host without getting redirected by the broker. This is critical for individual host tests to work right, and even better, this allows Canary to do an admin style login without actually needing admin rights on the hosts. At the end of the wizard, my configuration results are displayed again, and everything went as expected. If you see any failure messages, double-click on them to find out more details about the problem, and feel free to reach out to our support team at rdpsoft.com/support with any issues. Now that this workflow has been built with tests against individual session hosts, I'll want to save it in its own separate workflow file. After the workflow file is saved, I'll perform another manual test to make sure everything is working okay. With both of my workflows tested successfully, the last step to make Canary go live with its automated recurring testing is to schedule each workflow at a specific time. Scheduling workflows with the Remote Desktop Canary service allows you to only run synthetic testing when you want to, and to avoid testing during maintenance times in the evening when you may be performing updates or taking servers offline. So what I'll do now is schedule my individual server RDP login tests first thing in the morning at 6 a.m. until 6:10 a.m., giving Remote Desktop Canary just enough time to check each server and alert me if there are any problems with the server pool. Then, for the rest of the day, until right before midnight, I'm going to have Remote Desktop Canary do synthetic login tests against my 2 full RDS collections, testing all the way through the Remote Desktop Gateway, the connection broker, and its dynamic assignment onto a session host. And that's all there is to it. Within a few minutes, the Remote Desktop Canary service will launch a sandbox user session on this local VM and will start performing synthetic tests in this session. As you can see in Task Manager, the Canary SB sandbox session is running, and the Remote Desktop Canary testing module and lightweight RDP client are running and conducting tests in the background.